Hello and welcome to another Stage to Sofa. In today's episode, I'm joined by world-renowned pianist, conductor and vocal coach Carrie-Ann Matheson. Working with singers all over the world, Carrie-Ann's expertise is second to none. Having conducted at both the Metropolitan Opera House and Opera Zurich, Carrie-Ann's career has taken her on a worldwide adventure. A passionate advocate for young emerging opera talent, Carrie-Ann has recently been made the artistic director for the San Francisco Opera Center. She is not only a very well-established educator, she's also an incredible performer who has performed with the likes of Joyce DiDonato, Rolando Villazon, Jonas Kaufmann and Benjamin Bernheim, to name but a few. Carrie, it's such a huge privilege to have you with me here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Phoebe. Great to be here.
So welcome. So how are you finding this huge transition that we've all been faced with? And what coping mechanisms have you found to be useful during this difficult time?
You know, when it all first happened, to be really honest, I was so glad for a little bit of a pause. I think at that time, I thought, oh, you know, it'll be 3 weeks. And then we're all going to be back to work. And so I finally saw that I had the time to do all of these things that I hadn't had the time to do before. I immediately signed up for Russian lessons. I signed up for some online courses that I'd always been wanting to take, but never had the time. And that lasted for a while, and I was going really, really into it in my normal type A personality way. And then I kind of crashed. And the weight of the situation and watching what was happening in the world, it all sort of really caught up with me. And then I sort of just shut down for a few weeks, and we spent a lot of time just walking in the woods and being at home and doing things, just sort of normal domestic things. And that was really sort of nourishing for my soul. Like, we could be safe here in our own little world, while there was such chaos and despair happening around us. And then I felt the need to start to create again. So I had a terrible time practicing. You know, I didn't want to practice during this, and that was sort of disturbing to me. I've always been a very goal-oriented practicer. I don't play the piano generally just for fun. I play it's task-oriented. So then some tasks came up that I had to get back into practicing again, and that was a really rude shock after some time. What fighting my desire to I fought against having to practice. and having to create, and it felt very strange, I guess. And at the same time, I'm one of the very lucky ones that actually has been able to perform a bit during this time. So I'm really cognizant of the fact how lucky I am. But at the same time, it created a real internal battle for me to sort of pull myself out of COVID bubble and try to go back out into the world with all of that means. That means getting on planes and traveling. That means spending hours again at the piano and sort of putting my life back to where it was, even though it's not the same anymore.
It has been a really challenging time, I think, for all industries and particularly performers. And I totally understand and can relate to not wanting to practice during this time. It's affected people in such different ways. But I'm really glad to hear that, you know, you're starting to get to that point where things are starting to come back again now. And, you know, we're in a totally new sphere and a totally new industry that's finding its way. But hopefully, fingers crossed, it won't be long until we find a clearer path for performing to happen worldwide. Now, if I may, Carrie-Ann, I would love to take you back to a point before arts was even really in the forefront of your mind. I know you were very determined to become a psychologist in your early years. Could you talk us through that time and how that period unfolded, and then how your life took this path into this wonderful world of music?
since I was a teenager, I've always been really fascinated with the way people work. I want to know what's behind their thinking. I love to know what motivates people to achieve more, to make really bold choices. I've always loved looking at that and examining that with people. Even when it came, when I was a kid, down to the kind of television that I wanted to watch. It was never about external actions or something. It was always about interesting characters. So I really wanted to study psychology. And my parents said, no, unless you study music, we're not paying for school. And whose parents say that? Mine. But I'm super glad. I'm super, super grateful to them now, obviously. But it was a real bone of contention back then. And I really railed against it because I didn't want to be a musician. I wanted to be a normal person. So in the end, actually, now that I'm a vocal coach, I spend all of my days helping people, encouraging people to be their best self and to open up parts of themselves that they maybe were not aware that they had, and to look inside the characters of opera and underneath the meaning of poetry. And so I'm really fortunate that I've managed to marry these two great loves in my life, music and psychology. And here I am.
Oh, it's so amazing. And I share the same fascination in psychology. And I'm wondering how much impact do you feel it's had on getting you to the point that you're at as well? So not just for your young singers, but in terms of you and the way you've approached this career.
What a great question, Phoebe. No one has ever asked me that before. Huge, huge, because what we do, we're constantly interacting with people. And so if you're a person who is not curious about other people, you can shut yourself down. And then you become the kind of colleague that no one really wants to have in the room. And I think one of my strengths in building my career has been my love of engaging with people and being really open and excited in celebrating the successes and challenging the things that maybe are not going so well for people. And that's helped me to establish actually really close connections with some of the most prominent people in our business. So I would say that it has had a massive effect on my career trajectory.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering if you always had that as a child, because I know you grew up in a very small town and you know your sister and brother have gone into finance and you went into this wonderful world of arts, but did you always have that ability to connect with people in that way as a child?
I think I was a really sensitive child and I was the kind of child that you could hurt really easily. So, or if I saw someone else hurting, then I had a very hard time dealing with that. Animals, people, I couldn't stand to see anyone suffering. And I was always trying to be helpful and to make other people's lives easier as a child. And so I think probably, yeah, the signs were probably there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I'm wondering, at what point do you remember your earliest memory of live music?
Wow. I'm a little bit stuck on that. You know, I come from a really small town, as you said, and so we didn't have maybe access to a lot of like bands coming into town and orchestras traveling through. We had an orchestra, um, a really quite a good orchestra in my hometown, but I think probably my earliest memory of music was probably when I started playing and competing in our local music festival. And I think that's probably the first time that I really experienced other people making music. And from there, of course, my parents are not musicians, so my mom was the one who mostly sort of shepherded me through my music festival times. And so we would go to the symphony and we would go to concerts at the university when I was a kid. So it was nurtured, but it was only because I started playing the piano and showed a talent for it.
Wow. And I'm wondering, is there a person during that time or later through your career that's been a huge influence for you and has impacted the artist that you've become today?
You know what's really interesting? So during the COVID shutdown, I did play a little bit. I pulled out a book of Chopin nocturnes that I hadn't opened in probably 25 years, maybe. And I found notes from my teacher in college, who was my first sort of main piano teacher. She was the college professor the professor at my university, and I was really young and studying with her. And so I see how she planted the seeds for the musician that I am right now. And it blew my mind because I always somehow, perhaps rather arrogantly, thought, oh no, I mean, these ideas, it's just came to me really naturally. But that's actually not true. She was such a great teacher, and the ideas of planting the seeds for expressive devices, or to think about the way music is shaped, that it was all there on the paper. So that was Dr. Frances Gray at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. And probably the next major influence, the most important influence, was my teacher, Warren Jones, he was my teacher at Manhattan School of Music and also at the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, California, which was is a summer school. And it was with Warren really that my understanding and love for working with singers was really born in those years with him.
Wow. What sort of advice did he give you as, a young pupil? What bit of golden advice do you remember from him that stuck with you?
Singers, your instrument is your body. If something is not going right in your life, it's going to affect your instrument. If things are not going well with your instrument, it's going to affect your life. And anyone who wants to be a vocal coach needs to have that as their grounding place. That needs to be the foundation of working with singers, because we don't understand that. I'm a pianist. If I had a fight with my husband, I can still play. If your throat is tight because you're really emotionally upset, singing doesn't work so well, does it? So that was one really, really amazing gift that he gave me right at the very beginning, before I had learned anything about the technique of vocal coaching or about how singers sing. Wow. But just on the personal level. So again, we can see that the psychology of it was so important to me right from the very beginning.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the empathy as well, that to be able to put yourself in those shoes of a singer is just something that is so cherished by so many singers when they see it in a pianist and in any other instrumentalist, because as you said, it's part of our anatomy, and to recognize and understand how that could feel, I think, is definitely a huge, amazing piece of advice to be given right at the start of your journey, as you said. And you have gone on to be an incredible coach yourself, as we've discussed, and you've taught so many wonderful singers. And I'm wondering, what is the most rewarding coaching experience that you've experienced in your own career so far?
There are so many on so many levels. I think for me, my goal has remained this throughout my career. When someone comes into a coaching with me, my sole goal is to have them feel better or have discovered something by the time they leave their time with me in that 1 hour. There are longer term partnerships that I've had, people who've coached with me for years. I think probably the goal for me is always to have them not need me. I want singers to have such a wide and rich toolbox that they know where to pick the answers out from. And if they want me to give them feedback on how they sound, and I'm talking about the professional singers mostly now, then I'm happy to give my feedback. In terms of emerging singers, helping them build that toolbox is an amazingly rewarding thing to do. To watch the light bulb go on when someone figures out something that they couldn't do the week before, as any teacher will say how amazing that is.
Completely. And I can see from your face, it brings you such joy as well. Do you get the same level of joy, or is it a same feeling when you're performing, or is it completely different? I wonder how they differ, or if they do.
Phoebe, I love this question so much because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm going to be really real with you here. So I'm really fortunate. I have a performing career that I'm very, very happy with. But I've gone through a fair amount of torture with it in my mind. I like to share energy with people on stage, and I'm lucky to do it with some really cool people. But inside my mind is this constant, or was actually, because I've now kind of worked through it, but this judge that just says the most horrible things. And it's derailed my enjoyment of my own performance. And I think I've talked with a lot of my colleagues about this, and I am not the only one who feels this way. But nobody talks about it. And so the ugly things that I was saying to myself, oh, that was awful. Oh God, why did you do that? Oh no, everybody's gonna think you suck. So many things like that really had gone pretty consistently through my head. So I had to do a lot of thinking about what the reason was that I wanted to be a performer, and did I want to be a performer? And the answer is yes, I do love to be on stage. But I had to sort of readjust my goal, because my goal had to be something that was not about me ultimately. It had to be about the music that I was performing, the person I was sharing the stage with, and what we were bringing to the people in the audience. So removing the focus on myself, letting go a little bit of the idea that I needed to be perfect, and enjoying the whole thing as a whole. And that's sort of been the key for me. It's a work in progress, but it's the key.
Wow. And I love that. And I love those moments. And I'm wondering, at what moment in your career did you have that sudden light bulb that you thought, actually, I need to be doing, this is my focus, but so that I can do that?
Actually, it happened because I started working with a performance coach. And she really sort of helped guide me through and talk me through all of the noise that was in my brain. And it took not very long. It took like, a couple of hours of talking with her and just realizing, wow, I'm way too ego driven with this, and I need to just let go of it. So and look, through my life, there'll be times when that's easier, and then times when it's not, depending on whether you're feeling well, how much sleep you're getting, how much time I had to prepare, whether it's the first time I did a program or the 20th time I've done a program. The first time you do a program, it never feels good. Not in my experience anyway. So, but by time 20, then you think, okay, yeah, no, I know my way around this now, and I can relax a little bit. But now I have to actively focus every time on what I'm trying to create around my performance.
Wow. And amazing that you had a performance coach. I know there's a lot of people, including myself, that have also opted for that level of coaching, and it's really insightful, and I'm glad that gave you that light bulb moment. I'm also wondering now, you've accomplished so much as a coach, as a pianist, as a conductor, and you're at a really incredible point in your career. What has been the biggest obstacle that you've faced to get to that point? Would you say it has been dealing with what we've just spoke about, or has there been anything else that you've experienced?
Um, for me personally, I would say that learning how to harness the power of my mind in the right way has been the biggest challenge for me. I'm a perfectionist and I'm hypercritical. Uh, I'm not hypercritical of people that I coach. I have a very high standard, but I would never I would never expose the people that I coach to the same things that I do to myself when I'm performing, or I used to do, I should say. Um, so I would say that probably that has stopped me, but it actually hasn't, because I've continued to perform. I've continued to to challenge myself, to do new things that are scary. um, but I wonder what would have happened had I not had those voices. Had I figured out sooner how to silence them, what would have happened?
That's so amazing. I love that thought process. I think it's really healthy and amazing that you've got to that point that you're at now and you've overcome all of these incredible hurdles that you've just spoken about mentally. It's just fantastic. And I'm wondering now, there's lots of young singers out there who are feeling the weight of this whole huge impact that this virus has had on the industry. What piece of advice would you give to them right now at the start of their career to cope in this situation they've been faced with?
Think that there's an incredible opportunity here. Um, of course, we all have to acknowledge the incredible tragedy, the lives lost, the livelihoods lost, the general state of the world right now. That is an immense tragedy. Um, but in the midst of that, there is always hope. And because now we have time on our own now, without a lot of the distractions of everyday life. Now is the time to look inside yourself and really figure out why you're doing this. Why do you want to be a singer or a pianist? Why are you an artist? What kind of artist do you want to be? What do you need to have in your life to make sure that your life is well-rounded? Where do you see that things are a little bit off balance? And what do you need to find to balance them out? Where do you get that support from? What questions do you need to ask? It's the time for introspection now, I think.
I think that's golden advice, and I think a lot of young singers will be able to relate to that. So thank you for that piece of offering. We're in a very strange time, as we've spoken about. We're all maneuvering this new world that we've been hit with. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? You've been given this incredible job at the San Francisco Opera Center. Where do you see yourself? Where would you like to be 5 years from now if I were to have this conversation again?
But yeah, this position with as artistic director of San Francisco Opera Center is an enormous opportunity for me, and quite frankly, a dream come true. I've always loved working with young musicians, as we've talked about, and the opportunity now with the support of this really special administrative team in San Francisco, I think the possibilities for creation and to really positively affect the lives and artistry of so many young musicians, it's really, really exciting to me.
So amazing. And do you see that developing even more in the years that you're there? So, obviously it's a new position and you're going to start it in January. How do you see, as I said, 5 years from now, do you see yourself in the midst of it, in the midst of working with these singers still? Is that the end goal for you?
I think probably I intend to continue my performing career because I think it's really important that I continue to nurture my own development as an artist. But in 5 years, of course, I see myself. That's when I feel like maybe by then we'll be able to really be able to see the change that we're bringing, hopefully, in the industry. And actually, at this particular time, as the industry has to build itself again post-COVID, I think having leaders in that sort of position, and I look at the young artist programs in the United States in particular, and they're really good leaders in that world right now. So I think the potential for change is enormous, and I'm really excited to be part of it. And I think, yes, in 5 years, I sure hope that I'm still managing to help and to help people change their lives.
Oh, me too. I can't wait. I'm really excited to see how it's going to unfold. And I'd like to talk a little bit about your own performing. So when you are stood in the wings and you're about to go on stage and perform, can you just talk me through what that looks like for you? What's going on in your head and how are you feeling?
In the minutes immediately following walking out on stage. So it usually, because I'm always on stage with the singer, so I find that usually it's better for us to be separate. I usually, as an accompanist, it's really, really crucial that I do not show any sense of being nervous. If a singer is nervous, the last thing that they need is a nervous Nelly pianist. So no matter how much turmoil I might have happening inside, like on the after a short rehearsal period and the debut of a new program, for example, of course I'm going to be nervous, but I can't show it. So I tend to kind of keep to myself. I have a very rigid schedule on performance day that sort of keeps me as grounded as possible. I'm generally meditating in my dressing room for the last like 10 or 15 minutes before I go on stage, which I find very, very beneficial. And one of the things actually also that really helps me is sort of doing a fast forward of the performance and seeing the outcome that I want. And that's a sort of recent thing that I've been doing that works really, really well.
That's so interesting. I'm really fascinated by visualization, so I'm definitely going to look into those techniques some more. They sound fabulous. So Carrie-Ann, you've been so fabulous to speak to, and I'm so grateful for having you here. But we've come to the final question, which is, what piece of advice would you give to an 18-year-old Carrie-Ann?
Don't worry so much. Really, don't worry so much. Just take risks, be bold, stop judging yourself. You're okay. Just be, experience, live, enjoy, and be courageous. That's a lot of advice. That's a huge amount of advice.
It's fabulous advice though, amazing. And I'm sure your 18-year-old self would be very, very happy with that. So thank you, Carrie-Ann. Thank you so much for joining me on Stage to Sofa. You've been such a joy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Phoebe.